So hello everyone. This is Cristiana Eltrayan again for the Pranic Festival Online. I know you've missed us for 2 weeks of pause because we had to do other things, but tonight we came back strong with a very special guest and friend of mine, Robert Grant.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Robert is way beyond what I could present, but I'm going to just say that he's a polymath, he's a musician, he's an artist, he's a sculptor, he is a businessman, he's the founder and CEO and co-partner and managing partner of a company called Stratsby. And he's dealing with his intention in this world, at least what he's playing with now, is to mix innovation and math and artistic design and entrepreneurship, and to bring a new light on all these things, from a very creative and polymathic perspective. But just to mention, from what I see, that's just the things Robert is playing with, because the way his mind functions and he's integrating principles of math and physics and music and frequencies and DNA and genetics and all that. I mean, you're going to see, the things that I mentioned with companies is just a game for him. So thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you.
Robert has also discovered, and that's what I'm very interested in, and many people that are watching are interested in, he has discovered parallels between the Vitruvian Man, the chakra system, the pyramid coordinates of the pyramids in Giza, and also the coordinates of the planet. So that's also interesting to talk about. And I know many people that are watching or will be watching and recording are very curious about that. So start with whatever feels comfortable, but let's make sure we touch on that on the discussion.
Okay, all right. So, I would say that the Vitruvian Man by Leonardo da Vinci is one of the most iconic, masterpieces of art that we all kind of look to. And I remember the first time seeing it, I was probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old. And I remember thinking that there was something special about that picture, that illustration of a man. I couldn't understand why he had, 4 arms and 4 legs. And I remember thinking that right away. And what was the significance of the circle and the square? And what we've now found is that that there is indeed, Leonardo da Vinci was very famous as a cryptographer. He left many hidden messages in his paintings and his works of art. And I think we're only scratching the surface on many of those hidden messages. And the first of which that I had found with my colleague, Alan Green, whom you know also very well, came about because I was, it was the night my son was born, I remember, and I was kind of like waiting as my wife was going through contractions. She was in labor for 26 hours in total. So it was a long, long time for labor, right? But I was very excited, highly anticipated the birth of my son. And while she was trying to get some rest and sleeping, I couldn't sleep. So I pulled out my notebook. And because her contractions were, we had a lot of false starts and everything. So those of you that have had kids know what I mean, probably. And so I pulled out my notebook and I started sort of sketching while she was trying to sleep. And I started drawing out the Vitruvian Man, right, just from memory. And so I drew it out, and then I compared it later on to what I'd had, as an actual version of it. And I noticed something about it. First of all, it was not far away from the original, which was surprising. I mean, yeah, it wasn't Leonardo da Vinci's work, but it turned out much better than I ever could have hoped. And secondly, I had noticed when I drew the square and the circle that the peak of the square in my picture came out to 51.84 degrees. And so then I thought, well, I better get home, after this is all done. And yes, I have a baby boy and everything was great. So a few days later, I went back and when I had a moment to, after taking care of my duties as a father, I went and checked on the.
I think we lost you a little bit. I want to make sure that you hear me because we're not hearing you anymore. I mean, at least I am not hearing you anymore.
Angle is the Great Pyramid.
Um,
Christina, you seem frozen for a moment there. I just
yes,
want to make sure we're good.
yes.
Okay, so
I was saying that we lost you. So maybe if it's okay,
okay, yes,
could you
sure. I'll say that
repeat
again.
that? Thank you so
So
much.
I went back and checked the original by Da
Mhm.
Vinci. Sure enough, the original also measured at 51.84 degrees. And that was fascinating to me because anyone who's studied Egyptology knows, if they spent significant amount of time on the Great Pyramid, knows that the slope angle defines the volume, it defines the entire structure of the pyramid. And the pyramid is uniquely 51.84 degrees. And that's been an enigma to mathematicians and Egyptologists alike for a long time. Why that particular angle? Why not 52 degrees? Why not 51 degrees? Why is it 51.84 degrees?
Mhm.
And so that pointed me to the Great Pyramid. And I thought, is it possible that Da Vinci was trying to tell us something about the Great Pyramid? Because that's the most prominent angle that shows up in that picture.
Mhm.
Why would he be showing us this? And so then I also had this feeling, because looking at the lines of the Vitruvian Man, that at each of these horizontal lines, there's one on the chest, there's one on the neck, there's one right on the forehead, there's one that is at the knees, there's one that's at the groin. I noticed that maybe if I overlaid the Great Pyramid on top of the Vitruvian Man, that would be telling us the location of the chambers, of the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the ground level, and the subterranean level. And was shocked when I asked Alan Green to look at that. And he had already gone there mentally as well. And he comes back to me at the same moment and says, wow, look at what I've just basically found. And I had just sent him a message asking him to do the exact same analysis and overlaying it on top of the Vitruvian Man with the Great Pyramid. And sure enough, the chambers are marked by exactly the horizontal lines that Da Vinci left. And so I was thinking that there must be something very profound to tell us about humanity that Da Vinci had experienced and learned that he wanted to pass down to us in our day for some reason. And I don't know what that reason might be. So we made a little film on that. It's now gotten, well over 1 million views or so. And that's been great. But the encryption doesn't stop there. So what we believed is that there would be in the Vitruvian Man, there's a level that's at the neck, and the King's Chamber is right where the heart is. And so there's right along the chest, there's a line on the chest, and that's where the King's Chamber, and I don't mean just like close to the level, it's exactly the floor level.
Right on.
Floor level of each. And so I immediately thought, well, what is this telling us? Possibly that there are other chambers that are yet undiscovered in the Great Pyramid. And those chambers, one of them has already been sort of very famously been searched for, because in a Scan Pyramid project in 2017, they found that there is another chamber above the Grand Gallery and to the right and slightly above the King's Chamber that would suggest that it might be as large even as the Grand Gallery, which could fit a jet airplane in. It's quite large, right?
And
it's a very large structure.
And that happened right after you went there with Nassim and the team of 240 people and worked during,
right,
quite a few nights in the pyramids, which is.
So when we were there in 2017, in October 5th, it was kind of an interesting time because it was, this is before I discovered all of the stuff related to the Vitruvian Man, right? Because the discovery of the Vitruvian Man stuff was only about a year ago. But in 2017, I went to the Great Pyramid, and Nassim had asked me to lecture at his conference there for residents. And we had about 200 or so people, as Christina had just said. And it was an incredible experience for a week for me. They stayed for another week, but I had to come back to work. But basically, it was the same time that in front of the fake pyramid in Las Vegas, 500 people plus were shot, right, by this shooter. And I remember thinking, what an interesting, bizarre, opposite parallel. We were at the Great Pyramid, And at the same time, there was a fake pyramid in Las Vegas where this horrible thing happened, and we were having this incredible experience at the same time and moment. And so, you know, we for the first time in history got permission from the government to open all three pyramids to us. And so we spent the evening in all three pyramids, and it was an incredible experience. And you know, I had major changes, I guess, after that experience that came into my life, and all of them have been really beautiful and good changes. But, you know, as we were there in the Queen's Chamber, we found this big heavy equipment that was all in the Queen's Chamber. And we asked, you know, the people that were with us that were the Egyptologists, you know, what is this equipment for? And they said, oh, this is the Scan Pyramid project. They just scanned the pyramid just this afternoon, right? We had to wait until they were finished so we could go in. And so that was on, you know, October 5th in 2017. And then a few weeks later, they completed all of their analysis of those scans, and they found that that there is indeed a very large chamber above the Grand Gallery, and that goes to another chamber, quite possibly, that is right at the throat level or the throat chakra level, right? And so now fast forward, you know, another 6 months after that in 2018, 7 months later, in May of 2018, I went back to Egypt and by myself. And I actually had 12 friends with me that were not part of resident science or anything. I'd spent a week with them in Israel and had an incredible trip there. And then I spent another several days in Egypt. And for the first day, they came with me. And I knew something was going to happen at that time. I just had this feeling. And that's why I even invited Nassim to come back with me on that trip. And so all week while I was in Israel, I'd been drawing in my notebook alpha and omega symbols, like all week. And I could not even understand why. And it was the kind of sacred geometry version of those alpha and omega symbols. And so the night that I went back to the pyramid, so I you know, was able to rent the pyramid, and no, it's not on Airbnb. So you can't find it on Airbnb. But I was able to rent the pyramid after it's closed, and I've done it now 5 times, right? So I've spent the night in the Great Pyramid 5 times. I think it's the most anyone's done. I don't know. They gave me a key, actually, and let me videotape walking with the key to the pyramid and everything. It was pretty funny. I posted on Instagram.
So,
you know,
so that's where the key is. That's where I have.
Yeah, it's like, exactly. It's like a frequent flyer program, I guess, for the Great Pyramid from the government. I don't know.
I'm
But
gonna buy and get it, yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Right, or some. Since it's not on Airbnb, I know where the key is now.
That's right. That's right. Just,
We're
well, I
good.
can tell you where to find the key. You know, I'll be the key master, I guess. So, so anyway, I went back, you know, in 2018 in May, and the first night I was in there, which was on May 7th in 2018. So just exactly, you know, 2 years ago and 11 days or something, 12 days. I looked down on the rim of the sarcophagus, and I noticed an alpha and omega symbol, which, knowing, also having studied the Great Pyramid quite a bit, and knowing that no writing had ever been found in the King's Chamber or in any of the chambers, unless it was like pure graffiti. And I immediately grabbed Mohammed, who was with us, who was the hieroglyphics expert. He actually tells a story on my Instagram. You can find it under Robert Edward Grant, just from last week. I posted that video. He tells a story about the night I discovered the Alpha Omega and how he was stunned because he'd been in there hundreds of times. And it's almost as if it appeared out of nowhere, even though it looked very, very old. And as if it was, you know, coming in from another dimension or something. It's obvious that it's very old, that it has a, you know, patina over it and everything, but he was blown away. And it's quite large. It's about 5.6 inches wide, and which is unique and important because the perimeter of the King's Chamber is 31.4159 meters. And the meter was actually used in the day. So we think that the meter is something very modern. Well, actually, it was used in the construction of the pyramid. It's very well known, and Alan did a lot of research on that you can find on YouTube if you're asking that question. They use
Well,
the cubit, meter, and the foot to go
something
with it.
tells me that they had way of measuring this stuff that is way beyond, metering it. I feel it was a
Oh yeah,
far
yes. I
more
mean, you could
accurate
say,
way
and
of.
they probably have other units of measure that we don't even know.
I
Right?
just,
So
I was just thinking that. Yeah, that's what I thought. They would.
yeah, so you could say that the meter would be the way to measure two-dimensional structures,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
The foot would be the way to measure three-dimensional structures, and the cubit is the way to measure four-dimensional structures. So, and it's funny because the cubit's the most ancient of our systems, right? So it tells us something about potentially cycles of time.
Mhm.
That maybe what we perceive as being our far distant past might actually be our future also. So, and yesterday there was an article that just went out that basically said that, a particular type of neutrino was discovered in Antarctica by NASA that is traveling away from Earth, which should never be the case. And for it to travel away from Earth, this the tau neutrino, must be traveling backwards in time. So I had found, which is an interesting concept, right? Now, they describe it as a parallel universe, but because we're so stuck to believing that the universe is only going one direction in time.
Exactly.
Well, maybe it's just another dimension within the same universe. But anyway, not that I do believe in a multiverse as well, which is that just like galaxies, we used to think there was only one galaxy. Now we know there are billions and trillions of galaxies, right? And I think the same thing will be true eventually with scaling related to the universe, that we're part of one universe that just mirror reflects infinitely.
I
And
believe
it's
that
about
what
conscious expansion.
I believe that what is shown to us by this new discovery, it's not even tiptoed around enough now. They're not even close to what the universe is showing us about how it functions. The concept of backwards in time is only accurate or applicable if you refer to time as an existing unit. But if you look beyond it, it's just possible that we're shown something much deeper, and I'm looking forward to see how science is going to handle it, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you
Because
know
we're trying to put words on things that, it's like when you live in a second dimension, trying to use words to describe a third dimension.
exactly,
Right?
that's what I was
And
trying to say. And it's I've never been able to learn very well math or physics or even history in school, because there was some deep sense of untruth and inaccuracy to all three sciences. I was a smart kid. I did well in all the others, and I could do well in math and science, but I was always feeling they're not even close to reality. And I'm looking forward for them to get closer, and we're not there
well,
yet.
I definitely think that we're making big, big strides right now, more than ever before,
Mhm.
and opening up, these mysteries, I guess, as it were, both scientifically and esoterically.
Mhm.
So, Ari was, of all people, right? Why is it going to be me that discovers the Alpha Omega
That
and
was
the
my
G?
next question. Exactly. Why
Right?
do you think it's you that is discovering this?
Because we are all one. We are the universe.
Mhm.
And in fact, you could say that the universe is actually maybe a better way to describe the word universe, which means one verse or one
Sure.
song, right? Would be to describe it as the U inverse. So we spend our whole lives looking for that which is outside of us for the answers. And yet, one very wise man said once that the way to enlightenment is to understand what is not you from the beginning. Because, and I thought about that this morning. I was thinking about that concept a lot, because I was thinking, what is not me? And as I start going through the exercise of determining what those things are that I perceive as separate around me is not me, I realize that none of it is not me. All of it
Is
is
you.
me,
Exactly.
right? And that's true for every one of us. No one of us is better than or more special than another. We're all special to the maximum degree possible, every single one of us, and it's all equal. And so your world around you is determined by how your lens is. It's the eye through which you see the world. And so when you realize that, then every one of us is on a hero's journey. Every one of us is on a realization that we are the you inverse or the universe, right? That we are just reflections of everybody else's subconscious. And when I realized that, and what Alpha and Omega actually represents is the masculine and feminine. You know, the alpha is related to the bull, and the bull is the apis bull. So there are chevrons, and on our last trip to Egypt, which you were there as well, you know, we bumped into you on the Giza Plateau, of all places, as one does, right? You
You know,
like, oh, I bumped into you on the Giza Plateau. Oh my gosh.
yeah, since we're all at it, let's just meet on the Giza Plateau, you know.
Right.
I still remember, you know, sitting with Adam, you know, leaning against one of the pillars there, discussing organization, new finances, systems, and all that, you know, just as we by chance bumped into each other on the Giza.
That's right, exactly.
What's a girl
Yeah.
to do?
What's a girl to do? You know what's funny is that I bumped into quite a few people that day on the Giza Plateau that were not part of our group, that flew from all over the world. They just felt like they needed to be in Egypt at that week, which is amazing because like the next week, the whole country was shut down, right? I mean, completely locked down.
Because I was going to the pyramids in India. It was not, you know, quite random. My journey was from the Sphinx in Romania to the pyramids in Egypt to the pyramids in India. There's this friend and collaborator of mine that has built 22,000 meditation pyramids all over the world, including in US. One of them, we had a festival in March with Pranic people. And I got out of India right when it closed. I caught the last flight to Romania at 12 a.m. and then got back in my country, back to our Sphinx here. So we bumped into each other, you know, on purpose, actually.
Well, you know, I think it would be really helpful, and I'm feeling a little bit inspired, I guess, to share something with you I've shared with no one before. And if I can, I want to do a share screen. Is that okay?
Absolutely, yeah. I prepared a few stuff myself. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to show you a little bit of work on this Vitruvian man that is since the time that that we last met. So this is all new kind of information, right? And some of this I have shown some people before, but a lot of it has not been seen before at all. So we're looking forward to showing you this. So basically, this is the Vitruvian man, right? And we all recognize the Vitruvian man. And what Da Vinci was famous for having studied a long time was something called squaring the circle. Now, the square represents the masculine energy, and the circle represents the feminine energy. And there are two ways to square a circle. One way is to do it with matching the area of the square with the area of the circle, right? So you know that you calculate area with a square simply by multiplying the side length by itself. You square it, right? And you calculate the area of a circle by basically taking its pi r squared is going to give me the value of the circle, right? And the other way to square a circle is by matching the perimeter of the square with the circumference of the circle. Now, those two squares will create completely different squares and circles that don't match because you can't match both the perimeter of the square with the circle and the area. It's just not possible. So what's interesting was that the way to match a perimeter square is the blue square here you see. And the way to match the area square is the red square. Now what Da Vinci drew was the green square. Now, Da Vinci studied how to square a circle for more than 10 years. And this was very well documented in a book by Walter Isaacson, who wrote a biography on Da Vinci's life a few years ago. And I read the book. And so you would think someone who studied this for 10 years would know how to make a square that's at least one or the other, right? But he made neither. And why? What was he trying to say to us? Well, one of the things that was fascinating to me was that I had a copy of the Vitruvian Man illustration in my house, and it was a scale-sized copy. and I'd forgotten about it. I had it made 20 years ago, and I put it in a closet somewhere because I got a much larger version, and I put it up in my office at home, and I'd forgotten about this smaller version. Well, the original one happened to be exactly in my house, and this was a copy made by Taschen, Taschen. So I thought, oh, I'll take it out of the frame and let me see what I can see with this, because it's a scale copy. And it said it right on the back, this is a scale, 2-scale, perfect. And of course, I measured it as well to see if in millimeters it was a match. Well, I also looked at it in inches. Now, there was no unit of measurement that was used during Da Vinci's time of millimeters and meters. That came later, even though I just said that the Great Pyramid was built on meters as well. And so I measured the diameter of the circle that Da Vinci drew, and it turned out to be 8.64 inches exactly. And I noticed the radius was 4.32 inches, which is half that. And radius, I noticed that the word radius is an interesting word because it's also radius.
Yes.
Right? Radius means, right, like the Son of God. And this representation of the circle and the square is also a representation of the sun merging with the moon, right, into one. That's an alchemical reference. It's also a Rosicrucian reference. Now, Da Vinci was a famous Rosicrucian. So interesting that in music, 432 hertz tuning is kind of a very popular trend right now, right? Very popular trend. And I wrote a paper on 432 hertz tuning about a year ago and published it. Now, what I noticed was not only this, but Da Vinci's square was not a perfect square. So you'll see at the top up here, it's 7.07 inches across the square. And at the base, it's 7.18 inches. So it's a larger square at the base than it is at the top. And what I realized was that there's a relationship he's trying to teach us here. When I raised the square up from the base of the circle to being exactly over the circle, just as I had done here, right? So that's central. So its center point is the same as the navel,
yes,
right? Then I noticed that it's creating kind of a 3-dimensional square. So it creates this line because of the way this line goes down at the bottom, and the circle itself becomes the other side length. So it becomes like a cube. So it's like we're looking at it and we're allowed to see it as a cube, which is a very subtle encryption. It's a brilliantly subtle encryption. The other thing I noticed was that the circumference of the circle that he drew, right, based on 432, comes out to a very, very near constant to Euler, which is counterbalancing to pi. The Euler number calculates compound interest rates. And I thought, that's interesting. And then when I drew another circle around the square that Da Vinci drew, it comes out to be exactly pi times 10. I remember the King's Chamber is exactly pi times 10 in meters. So that was kind of remarkable for me. So then I thought, well, what if I measure it just using units of 1 for radius? Do those ratios still exist? Well, what I found was that the ratios still come out to 0.864. So what happens is the radius of this circle from here to here, right, versus the diagonal of the Da Vinci square that he drew is exactly 2 times 1 over 0.864. So there's a message inside here, right? And what is this message? The other thing that comes out is that the circle that used to have a value of pi times 10 now has a value of phi squared, right? Which is 72722205. You multiply that by 360, it gives you phi squared, 360 degrees. And the inner circle now has a value of tau, which is 2 times pi. Exactly. So I knew there was something going on. Well, 6 years ago, I drew this. This was just in my work on trying to understand the separation between light and darkness. And if you look at the values here, I said there's a light sun, and this is before I knew or thought anything about Vitruvian Man, and a dark sun, and a world of pi units and a world of Euler units. And the circumference here is the same, 2714. the diameter is 864, the radius is 432, right? And it goes infinitely that direction. So you've got all these numbers that kind of match also the Yuga cycles, right? And then on this world, the value here is pi, 314, right? Same thing. And these numbers were all identical. And then I found that pi divided by 432 is 7.2727, and Euler divided by 432 is tau. So I found as well that this relationship of 0.864, and I add 1 to 0.864. So add these two together and I have light speed. Now here I'm finding that Da Vinci did the exact same thing in this drawing with the exact same values using inches as the unit of measure. And it doesn't matter which unit of measure I use because it creates ratios that still come out to the same values, right, of 0.864, right? These ratios are all over the place at 0.864. So what I realized is that what's happening here is that there's a separation between light and darkness. So this green square right here is the square that Da Vinci drew. And if I draw circles within that and then inscribe squares within that going infinitely, I'm noticing that the value that's created is the same as binary math. So the perimeter, so P means perimeter, D means diameter, S means side length, AC is area of the circle, AS is area of the square. Now, what's interesting about this is that the square that Da Vinci drew here, this green Da Vinci square, it has an area of 50, okay? And the perimeter value comes out to be binary math. So notice this is the square root of 800, the square root of 400, square root of 200, 100, 50, and so on. It will continue to expand and contract on these binary expansions perfectly, just with the one square that Da Vinci drew, which was neither squaring the circle in the perimeter nor squaring the circle in area. And then the same thing when I took the Da Vinci circle, which has this modified Euler value, very close to Euler, right, of 27.143 inches. And incidentally, the sun's diameter is 864,000 miles, and its circumference as a star is 2.714 million miles. So it's the same number series, right? Our sun, when using mile reference, come out to these exact same numbers. But now I no longer have these neat numbers like the square root of 1600 and the square root of 800 and the square root of 400. Now I have these other numbers here. So what I did was overlay the two. So the two most famous mathematical constants are pi and Euler. Besides the golden number, which is phi, but that's not a transcendental irrational. Pi and Euler are the most famous in mathematics by far. And those of you that have studied Ramanujan did a lot of work on the Euler number in particular. So with the circle and the square Da Vinci drew, he encoded knowledge of both pi and Euler and how the two of them work together to separate light from darkness. That's kind of amazing to manifest electromagnetism and radiation and to manifest gravity, its opposite condition. So in the circle and square Da Vinci left us, which happen to be the exact proportions of neither squaring the circle in perimeter or in area, he encoded this knowledge for us about the nature of duality. And that's a very, very deep message. Now, why 864? Well,
exactly. That was my next question. Yeah.
Look at this. The sun, 864,000 miles diameter. There's 86,400 seconds in a day. There's 86,400 miles of the diameter of Jupiter. And the moon has its orbital speed at that. And what you've got is you've got a trinary expansion, which would be 3 to its powers, being multiplied by 2 to its powers. And so out of the first 1,000 integers, we have 12 numbers that are both binary trinary numbers. And those binary trinary numbers, you see them right in here, right? All these numbers right here. And these numbers are the ones that are creating the musical scale in perfect 432 Pythagorean tuning. They have the greatest amount of divisibility. So we think of prime numbers. Prime numbers are numbers that can't be divided up, right? You can't break them up equally into whole numbers. Well, these numbers, I'm actually calling them time numbers, or the opposite of prime numbers. they can be broken up the most of all numbers. So we don't have a classification for them yet, and I'm going to publish a paper on the classification of these time numbers, right? That these are all the numbers that represent time, the seconds in a day. We have 43,200 seconds in 12 hours. It's the same number series, that same 108, 216, 432, 864, 1728. These are repeating numbers over and over again. And so this creates a DNA, which then when these number series overlap each other, now it's no longer doubling math that's doing it. It's the convergence of doubling and trinary math, or binary and trinary math. And this gives us the inverse square law, which is defining gravity and electromagnetism. So if you have a nuclear bomb go off, the amount of damage that it will have on your body is going to be directly proportional to the distance you are from the blast site or ground zero, right? Mm-hmm. And we use the inverse square law to calculate that value. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what's happening here. This creates a relationship between all these numbers. As I showed you, there was the Euler series, which creates gravity in squares, and the pi series creates circles, until with the Euler series, it creates a square that has an exoscribe circle around it that is equal to pi. So it gives you this overlap, this balance of masculine and feminine, right? And when it does that, then everything overlaps together to create this Euler-pi relationship, which now the difference between all of these values at all scales becomes 0.864. It's beautiful. It's like incredibly beautiful. And this is what we call duality. Another way for us to draw this is Da Vinci could have drawn a yin and yang symbol.
Absolutely. That's what I was saying, that he's describing perfectly the game of masculine and feminine, in other words. Yes?
That's exactly what he's done. And he did it in a beautiful encryption and compressed an infinite amount of information in one circle and one square. Now, what blows my mind is how is it that the numbers exactly match what I drew 6 years ago in my notebook?
You tell us that, no?
Right. It's a good question.
You seem to have a strong connection with this Da Vinci guy.
Somehow, some way. And then I also realized that it overlaps the spiral of Theodorus. Now, Theodorus means God's gift. Mm-hmm. And I was drawing for this class, during the COVID quarantine, I decided to teach a geometry class. And I didn't know, that was one of those moments that that we make a decision and we don't know what an impact that decision might have.
Yeah, that's my
And what a great joy it has been. Well, I'm not surprised for you because you're Christina, right? That's the thing. You're as special gets, because we all are also. But at the same time, like some of us, the earlier we recognize this about ourselves, the sooner we get to this flow, this zone of flow, when we know that we deserve and we are good enough. And even with all of our faults and everything, right? And so the sooner we get to that stage, the sooner we can be in flow with what the universe is trying to bring for us, right? So the day I made this decision on doing this geometry class, I thought maybe 30 people would take it, or 40 people, or maybe 100, I don't know. I was shocked when, over 50,000 people took it, right? And wow. I was like, wow. I mean, that was, first of all, it tells you that people were really bored at home, right? They were really had nothing to do.
Robert, if you get bored, you watch Netflix. You have to have a certain kind of intelligence and frequency to look at this stuff and be interested in that. It tells us a lot more about humanity, I believe.
I was shocked. I was truly shocked. And so I taught the class how to draw geometry so that, because I believe that the more geometry that you can see, the higher your consciousness raises.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So when you look at a bunch of lines inside Metatron's cube, or the flower of life, the intersecting lines, those nodal points, and most people might look at a whole bunch of lines and say, okay, I see a triangle or I see a square. But how many people in that whole bunch of lines would say, oh, I see a dodecahedron, or I see an icosahedron, or maybe I see a geometry that's not even been discovered yet.
We don't know how
because
to
those
name it.
lines,
Yeah.
right. And the more of those geometries you can see, then you realize that everything is one. And everything can be created, all versions and iterations can be created inside that one geometry. It's so beautiful. It's like incredible, right? And every time I discover a new geometry, that raises my consciousness so that I'm learning to see patterns of things that weren't there before, that I had told my mind did not exist, right? When actually they did exist. And now I've come to the conclusion that, you know, randomness, even though I make a random number generator, I actually make one for one of our companies. I tried to make the very best random number generator I can make, even though I don't really believe in the concept of randomness.
Exactly. But why do you make it then?
I make it because the world can benefit from it. It's used in virtual reality. It's used in all kinds of different areas in cryptography.
Cryptography, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Cryptography, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's necessary, right? It's absolutely necessary. They use it to make your credit card numbers, and you know, they need it for blockchains. They need it for all kinds of things, right? And but actually, you know, randomness is a word that I believe we use to describe something that we haven't discovered the inherent pattern that's within it yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
You know, we just haven't found it yet. It doesn't mean that it's random, right? In fact, you could say maybe it's because we're perceiving there's so many patterns. How do we define just one? And people say that pi, for example, is a totally random string of numbers. Well, I believe there's actually so many ways. I found so many ways to derive pi from equations. There's so many patterns in pi
and
that it's hard to distinguish only one pattern. And that's what we call random. Right?
And actually what I just read the other day, because I'm reading this book, you know, I've sent recently to some of you this author that has written the book The Forgotten Genesis, and he's written also about the chambers below the pyramid and inside the pyramid. So I was discussing these chambers with Nassim in 2017 in the summer, before you went to Egypt and before you discovered what they're doing there. So this author has included in his books some of the most important details about also pyramids and genetic constructions that have been done on Earth for us to become what we are, and mathematics and science and so on. So he has included some crazy stuff that is good to read, you know, to get closer to the nature of reality, at least as close as we can get with our minds. And this new book that is not in English yet, called The Etherical Crystal, is describing basically a new tunnel that they discovered in the inner earth. One was between Romania and Egypt, one was between Romania and Tibet, and this is a new one. And he's talking, amongst others, about the number pi, and he's talking about the fact that although it is believed that pi is a fixed number, I mean, it's always generating the same value, he's sharing that it might not be always the same. It might be actually a very, like, how to say this, fluid number. I don't know if
it oscillates.
It oscillated. Yeah. So
yeah.
You know that. Okay.
Absolutely. No, it's like a vortex, just like the Fibonacci series does too. Exactly. You know, someone will say, oh, the phi number must be exactly the irrational value 1.61803398887, right? And actually, no, phi is a zone.
Exactly.
If I could take the Fibonacci series that creates phi, you know, you could take 8 divided by 13, or 13 divided by 8, or 21 divided by 13. And those are going to give us close approximations that eventually will converge as the number series gets bigger and bigger towards a perfect irrational number. But that doesn't mean that 13 divided by 21 is not phi. And it doesn't mean that 55 divided by 89 is not the phi number too. Of course it is. So in fact, to that point, now that we're speaking about this, I taught my class the spiral of Theodorus. And I drew this on the page. It was right after I taught them how to draw the Da Vinci squaring the circle, right? With the exact proportions that he drew, because I felt like there was something special about that. And what I noticed was that when I looked at it later, the squaring the circle page, I could see the next page where I drew this spiral underneath it. So it was bleeding through. I thought this is weird because I used, 1 inch and 1 inch and then the square root of 2. And then you can create from the spiral of Theodorus all numbers from the simple number 1. So the side value on this entire spiral that you see behind this, right, is, and I could probably pull this out so you can see a little bit better. Okay, so I have to change the picture here instead and make it more opaque. There we go. Okay, so you see this spiral. The spiral, the side length is always 1, and it's always a 90-degree angle, right? So this is a 90 degree, this is a 90 degree, this is a 90 degree, and then it will populate every number infinitely. Square root of 14, square root of 15, square root of 16, square root of 17, 18, 19, all the way through. And I noticed something very weird about that because, first of all, the spiral will match up exactly where Da Vinci drew his square, right at the corner of 51.84 degrees, right here.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, that's the slope angle of the Great Pyramid. Now, not only that, but he drew it in a way that, I'm going to do this so you can see it better. He made a weird marking here. You see how his pen actually went outside the lines, right, of the square, because the square should have ended right here, yet it ends over here, okay?
Okay, why is that?
Because he was trying to force it to match exactly the lines of the spiral of Theodorus, which is the Fibonacci spiral. And the spiral of Theodorus is telling us that all numbers emerge from the number 1. So if I go back to this.
So if,
okay,
if we
see how it matches exactly?
If you were to put this in layman terms for a person that doesn't know or want to learn mathematics, what would you say the importance of this is? Why did he put all this in this particular pattern like that?
First, there's a message inherent in it. So where he placed the legs and the knees and everything, you could see here the most prominent places where the foot is and where this foot is, it's matching exactly the square root of 13 and the square root of 10, right? Right on these lines. Where he points his hand right here is exactly matching the square root of 31, right? So there are prominent positions on here. He used this as a frame to show us exactly where each of these lines are. And the bigger message is everything is emerging from the number 1, right? Because what he's really telling us is this, that there is a balance, right, that is achieved. What we think is separate and different is actually a separation between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. That we think the world around us is happening to us, when actually it's a projection of what we do not know about ourselves being presented back to us until we accept those things. So this is the duality experience. Until we no longer perceive duality, because we recognize that for there to be light, there must be dark. You know, one of the things that I fundamentally believe is that darkness is not the absence of light. Instead, it's the opposite condition of light.
Yeah, it's what completes the light. It's what makes light visible. Without the darkness,
Exactly.
you don't see the light.
Exactly. It's a complementary opposite of it. So we live in this world of duality. What Da Vinci is trying to tell us is that we live in a world of duality, and yet everything is all emanating from the number 1, right? Everything just comes from oneness, you know? So we see this world that here's the good, here's the bad and the good, and here's the good and the bad, and this is life. You know, we judge everything around us when actually everything is just this. We are X and everything else is 1 over X. And this is showing up exactly as a number series that is in reflection spectra and absorption spectra. But everything is part of the same one, right? And this is from the Rydberg constant, which is part of the Bohr atom model. But the point is that what Da Vinci is trying to tell us is that the measure of man is to learn to perceive everything as its oneness, right? That everything emerges from oneness. Mm. It's not separation. That's the illusion that we create for ourselves. So that's ultimately the message that, you know, I wanted to give today. And I took this analysis and took it even further, of course, which basically then said, okay, you know, what did Da Vinci do here? Well, he mechanistically separated light from darkness, revealing advanced knowledge of math and physics constants, explaining duality. He explained, in order for us to transcend a duality existence, we needed something to be explained to us of what is duality. That the end of duality is recognizing that it was never separate. You know, I'll give you an example. So if you took 0 to the power of 0, what is the value of that? Because 0 is nothingness, right? But if I took 0 to the power of 0, what does that come out to? You would think it should be 0, right? It should be
0, but I think you have a surprise for us.
Yes, 0 to the power of 0, mathematically, is actually 1. And you're thinking, how can that be? I'll show you how it is. Right? That seems impossible, right? It seems totally impossible that that could be the case.
I've learned myself to not say the word impossible. I've taught myself.
Okay, so if we let's take 0.5 to the power of, that's what this button is right here, right? To the power of, right, 0.5 gives me this. Which, by the way, is exactly in inches one of the side lengths of the square Da Vinci left, just by chance, right? So now let's take 0.05 to the power of 0.05. Now, would you expect that that number would be smaller or larger? Because now I have two inputs that are smaller, right? Because I put 1 0 in front of it now, the decimal and the 0. So now the answer is?
Could be larger.
Larger. Why is it larger? It seems like it shouldn't be larger. So now I'm going to go even smaller. Take this to the power of, it's larger again, right? Now that's the opposite. If I go 2, right, to the power of 2, gives me that. And if I go to 20 to the power of 20,
multiplies.
Much bigger, right? Much, much bigger. So now let's keep going smaller and see what happens.
So what smaller multiplies and what, you know, it goes, I understood that. Yeah.
Eventually I get to 0. Now this calculator, some calculators will actually show that 0 to the power of 0 is 1. So now this is funny because some of the people, sometimes it says error, right? But on many calculators, it will actually show 0 to the power of 0 is 1. And the reason they have to put not a number is because that's like a politically correct answer, right? Because the calculator wants to give it the number 1. And so they had to write code over it to say not a number, right? It's not 0. It's not 0. So either we have a number, like the number 1, or we have, you know, no number, and we're going to call it 0, right? And that has a value for us too. That's a value that's quantifiable.
Also a number is a value, actually, yeah.
Right. But now this is saying it's not a number. So what is it exactly? Most mathematicians, you'll find if you look online, will say that it's the number 1. Because as you go smaller and smaller, you converge to that. I could go this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 5th to the power of
So it gets closer and closer to one. That's
It converges on the number one. So what we perceive as light and dark as being two totally different things. Actually, there's no such thing. It's just another way that light is playing. It's the same one thing. There's no such thing as light. We are perceiving the duality. We're perceiving the separation. What Da Vinci was trying to teach us was how to transcend out of that. And the reason why he drew 4 arms and 4 legs is because he was trying to represent, in a way, he did a lot of writing about the dragonfly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you know the story of a dragonfly, Christina?
Tell it to us, please.
So a dragonfly spends half of its life underwater, right? It goes through this whole metamorphosis process, and eventually one day a larva, it looks like a bug, right, type of thing. It doesn't have wings or anything. It crawls up a reed and goes out. So probably the other dragonflies that are still larvae are probably looking at the one that goes up and says, oh, he's dying.
He's ascended.
Right.
I would say he's ascended, yeah.
so then the larvae climbs up the reed, and then it metamorphosizes. It grows these beautiful wings, turns into these beautiful iridescent colors, like a rainbow, actually. When you look at a dragonfly, you'll know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And it lives its real destiny, which is to fly. Right. And I believe that's what Da Vinci's trying to tell us here too. That once we learn to transcend out of duality and realize that this is all a big encryption, an encryption of the mind, that time itself is an encryption, that we can transcend outside of that existence of dualistic thinking simply by learning to no longer judge. And that's equivalent to us climbing up the reed to the next level.
To the rainbow.
To the rainbow.
It's not by chance that we're using that, because actually rainbow has been used as a symbol of evolution in many cultures. You know, there's the rainbow serpent and the rainbow body in the Tibetan tradition actually is referring to what we're doing with pranic consciousness and pranic nourishment. And it's the frequency that is now imbuing the planet and shifting our consciousness. If you look at it in the subtle plane, you'll see a lot of rainbow. And even around the sun, that was on your birthday.
Yes.
That you were going to show to us, probably, or not.
Yeah, I can show you that. I can show you that, sure.
Yes, there's a big rainbow that appears very often when important moments in the history of humanity are happening. Like it appeared at the Romanian Sphinx when we had the second Pranic Festival.
Exactly.
In Romania. It appeared somewhere in Mexico when we were having a Embassy of Peace delegate gathering there, and we were doing some work there. So there's this thing of the rainbow.
This was at my in my backyard. This was in my backyard on May 18th, which is 518. It's the pyramid slope angle day, which just passed yesterday. And actually you can see also that there's, I never noticed it at the moment, but people looked at it later and said, hey, I see, look like eyes, right? And it's like a big head. And a pineal gland, like a vesica-shaped pineal gland, is the sun, right? So you can see these kind of eyes, and this eye is closed, right? The right eye is open. And it's kind of a weird thing, but when I showed it to one of my Tibetan Buddhist monk friends, he's like, oh, that means rainbow consciousness.
I was getting close to it then. And tell us, please, speaking about your birthday and the rainbow that appeared and so on, you have gone from being a businessman to being this multifaceted being that understands universe from a very high perspective. What shaped your life?
I think living in the world of judgment every day, right? And I mean, what is business? Business is a world where you have to exercise judgment every single day, right?
Judgment or
business judgment.
discernment?
Well, I mean, we call it judgment in the business world. We don't necessarily say discernment, because discernment has some sort of spiritual connotation, right? So sometimes we'll use the term discernment in business, but it's rare, right? It's very, very rare for someone to say discernment, because then it's like, wait, are you bringing some spiritual concept into this world?
It's like
It's
the
supposed to
C
be,
word.
yes, we are judged in business and success on our ability to judge. So when it's time for us in our own soul contract to learn a concept, we must learn it through experiencing its opposite. So if my soul contract is to learn non-judgment and complete unconditional love, right, then I must, in order to experience it fully and understand it, I cannot know the concept of pleasure without understanding what is pain, right? I must learn through opposites. So the experiences that I will continue to experience over and over again will be the opposite, right? So for example, if I'm supposed to learn, that I decide that I need to learn unconditional love while I'm here in this world, right? What I betrayal. Until finally I recognize that it is betrayal and I am that. And accept it. And actually learn to love it. Learn to love the suffering and the challenge and the difficulty, and then it no longer becomes the suffering and the challenge and the difficulty. So we are the sum total of everything that we judge. We attract everything we judge until we no longer judge everything that we attract. I'll say that again. We attract everything that we judge until we no longer judge everything that we attract. So we will, what we continue to resist in our lives is what will persist in our lives. We will see it again and again and again, and these karmic loops, these cycles, until we learn to no longer judge and rather to just accept it. I used to think that it was my job to convince the world, to make them believe like I believed. And then I realized that it was impossible to do that, because I will always have 50% of the crowd that will like something and 50% that will hate the same thing. And I realized then that there's really no such thing as love and hate per se. Here's why: because everything is like a circle. It's just like if I walk north, I eventually end up south. If I walk west, I eventually end up east. I know people that really aspire to be very humble. In fact, they create such an attachment around being humble that they can become, by their own admission later on, arrogant in their humility.
Yes, it's called spiritual arrogance. It even has a word to it.
I'll give you an example, right? The whole point is to learn non-judgment. I went to meet with the Dalai Lama with Nassim in October last year. And this was pretty funny, because we were sitting there talking with some of the lamas, and they have this whole thing where they love to debate. And they love debate of like scientific topics and stuff. They love physics. They love physics. And mathematics too. So here we were teaching the Dalai Lama math and physics for 5.5 hours. It was out of control cool. I mean, in his palace of all places, right? It's like we flew all the way there to meet with him, and then he asked us to stay for lunch, and it was crazy. And the best part, honestly, of the day was when he pulled Nassim's hair. Like literally pulled Nassim's hair. Now, look, Nassim's kind of got this long hair, right? And so, but nobody's ever pulled his hair that I've ever seen. And it was so funny, right? To watch the Dalai Lama, he says, "What's this?" He pulls his hair, which was just hilarious. But it was also a profound moment when the Dalai Lama looked at me and he said, "Soon you'll be able to prove God's existence through mathematics." Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, actually, when you say God, and again, some people get hung up on what the definition of God is, right? To me, it's just the entire universe. It's all one, right? And it is conscious. And I was already thinking, well, that's already for me, that already happened,
It's
right?
done.
Yeah, I don't need to prove it to anybody else, and I don't need anyone else to be convinced. I accept the world the way that it is. And that acceptance is what brings you joy and happiness. No, it's not pacifism. It's just recognizing that to see the world change, you have to be the change. And, on my birthday a few days ago, I turned 51 and I got a birthday cake. And last year I had a big party and everybody dancing and everything. And it was great. And this year I had like my two very close friends at my house. That's it, because it's quarantine, right? Nobody could come, right? And everyone's wearing masks and everything. And I mean, luckily I have a really cool Flower of Life mask.
That's cute. I never worn a mask, actually.
Yeah, well, now you have to by law. Otherwise,
now if I want to go to the market, I have to put something on. Mm-hmm.
People look at you really funny if they can see your mouth now, right? Even if you're smiling, they don't want to see your smile. It's really bizarre. So, but I think, again, this is part of that cocoon period coming out the dragonfly, right? So what I realized is that when the cake came and they were going to have me blow the candles on the cake, then I thought, well, I have to make a wish, right? And for the first time in my life, I had no wish.
I can relate to that.
I was just happy the way things are. And I don't need any difference. I'm pleased with, I love it. I love the experience. And I trust the universe now. So what was the change in me? I started to wake up from the illusion that I created for myself, which is something very profound and deep. And I'm still obviously very involved in business. I will be continuing to do so. I love creativity, and I will still, do things that are consistent with me and this evolution, right? I will still do those things. I'm going to make a film on this whole Da Vinci thing. We found not just the Vitruvian Man, but in almost all of his paintings, hidden encryptions that are pointing towards this higher evolution of mankind, which is how he was trying to direct and guide. He couldn't just do it in front of the world. I think he actually got there. I think he understood how to see through dimensions of time. And I believe that he wanted to leave that knowledge to people. And I think he encrypted it that only people that were intended to see it could actually have found it and seen it. Yes. For the right time, at the right moment, because everything's happening simultaneously. If there's another dimension of time where Da Vinci is painting something and thinking how, somebody in the future is going to find it. Yeah. And, I'm a cryptographer. I do cryptography, right? And I can tell you, nobody ever made an encryption so that it could never be unlocked. All encryptions are made to be unlocked, but only by the intended eyes.
Yes. Even in energy play, if you put a grid on something, you put it just to be unlocked by the one who frequency match it. And maybe that's how you've been able to see the alpha and omega on the sarcophagus that nobody else was able to see. Because when when someone puts something somewhere and he wants to conceal it, mm-hmm. You only reveal it, you put some energy on it that it only can be unveiled to the one who is frequency matching it. The other ones are just passing by, peacefully smiling. They don't notice anything, and that's possible. That's energy science that has been taught on Earth by all alchemists, I believe, and by all, if you will, what was considered to be magician, which was actually people who knew science. It's all science.
Absolutely. So, on our last trip in Egypt also, we discovered 8 new things as well, which is kind of, remarkable. And, that was not something that we expected. We found these things in the King's Chamber as well. And these things were pretty amazing. So I'll show you just a couple if we have a time.
Mm-hmm. And then we have infinite time because I have no limit now. I finished my day. Uh,
So this is inside the king's chamber, and we found new markings on the sarcophagus.
mm,
And so this was the process of trying to discern these things, because they're very old, right?
mm,
Extremely old.
mhm.
And what we ended up finding was writing, on the walls, which was not, supposed to be there. We also found this on the outside of the pyramid right here, which is writing that says, it says the word, right? It's the Devir.
Mhm.
And it's written right on the outside of the pyramid in a basin that's right underneath the chevrons. And this was the most remarkable thing we found right here. Discovery. Go ahead. Well, we just found something else here in the King's Chamber. Uh, it's a heart. This is a bull.
It's a bull and a heart, no?
You see a bull right here,
A bull and a heart.
and it's 8 feet wide, okay? So this is a bull. You can see it very clearly. Here's the head, here's the horns. But then also there's a cow outside of it, and it's right here. And here's the eye of the cow, and here's the horns of the cow.
Mhm. Tell us the significance of that, because some of the people watching are not knowing the symbolistic of this stuff.
Well, it's interesting. First of all, there's also writing up here. You can kind of see it. You see this shaded part? Now, I've walked in the King's Chamber many times. You can see some writing coming down right across this.
Mm.
And one of my friends reads Urdu, and he says this looks like a very similar language to Urdu, Sanskrit, and Hebrew combined. And apparently there was an older language called Nostratic, which I did not know about, that this might be written in. And we don't know exactly what it says. But what this represents is the Hathor is the cow. And the Hathor is represented by the Omega, the symbol of the Omega. So whenever you look at Egyptian mythology, you'll see that there's a cow called the Hathor that represents the universe, the dark mother of the universe. And her hair is shaped like, around her head is shaped like an Omega symbol.
Yes.
And the Apis bull is her son. So she gives birth to this bull. And in the legend, the Apis bull ultimately has to sacrifice himself to merge back into his mother. And he does it because of love for his mother. So the merger is Alpha merging back into the Omega. And that it becomes one. The masculine merging back into the feminine. So the symbolism here, again, goes back to the square and the circle. And it's through the heart, it brings the consciousness of the heart mind, or the heart brain. Now, when we showed this to the Egyptologists, they were freaking out because people have been in there thousands of times. And even Muhammad, he's been in there hundreds, if not thousands of times. And he even said, well, I've never seen this before. How could this be? And we found 8 things like this in the King's Chamber that literally just kind of came out. And they're obvious, right? This is kind of very obvious. Wow. I'm blown away. How could that have been missed? This cow and a bull right there. Well, maybe it wasn't there.
Maybe it was concealed, as we were saying earlier. There are certain information that are always there, but you only see them when you frequency match them, or even better, when the whole humanity frequency matches them to learn about them.
Now, it's interesting. The first time I saw this center of the bull's chest, I thought, well, it kind of looks like a heart somehow, but it's got like this, not quite a perfect heart shape to it. But I just noticed just now that there is a heart shape right inside here.
Beautiful.
and it looks like there's marks on it, like there's scars on it or something. So there's something going on, right? And I think that the pyramid might actually just be a reflection in some ways of our own conscious progression. Is we will see and perceive to the level and degree of perception that we are at. So I believe very soon that the throat chakra chamber will be discovered. And then the pineal gland, and then the crown chakra, which these are the chambers that we have not yet, found or gone into. But I believe that they will soon be discovered and found. And this all represents this merger of this sun and moon characteristics. And what's funny is even the measure that Da Vinci gave this here, he didn't draw the moon, but he made the exact space of the circle exoscribed around this square. So if I raise the square to the center of the circle, this circle, which has a value of pi, from the top of the head, it creates a silver crown of sorts that is the moon. And the size of this in inches, you can see the measurement right over here, is exactly 2.16 inches. Da Vinci left this exact amount of space of 2.16 inches right here. And it is 2.16 inches because it represents the moon, which is 2,160 miles.
And if we look also at Isis, she also has the sphere about over her head.
Yeah.
Same as.
And what's interesting also is that if you take the Da Vinci square and the circle go all the way around, now we're back to 1. So this value from the base, right, up to the top is exactly 10 inches. Comes back to 1. So you could say that in a way we're perceiving the separation between these polar opposites. And the moon symbolizes the subconscious mind, the darkness, the pathos, the irrational, intuition, the feminine, the hidden, right? And that which is to be seen, right? Which is the raw deus, the brain, the rational mind, the masculine. And 432 squared is light speed in miles per second. Represents the conscious mind, the logos and the light. And yet what we're now to do is to bring them back together into the heart brain, which represents the divine balance of masculine and feminine into the ethos. And 7920. So I took this analysis even further and did it in dimensional frames. So analyzed it in dimensional frames, and I hypercubed the hypersphere and used the exact value to find the volumetric measurement for a hypersphere. And it comes out to be almost exactly the sacred Egyptian cubit. 1.718 versus 1,718. That's exactly the volumetric measurement of a hypersphere. And the way you solve that is it's 1/2 times pi squared times radius to the 4th power. And that's kind of remarkable. And then we took that to a whole nother level. And of course, found also that it relates back to time itself, that the way we do measurements of the foot, meter, and cubit are embedded right in the symmetry of a hexagon merging with a pentagon. So this blue line from here to the top of the two combined structures is 1 meter. This is 1 cubit, and this is 1 foot. So these measurement systems are actually embedded in the geometry that we use, that's been around. And then when you spin these, it will create a diameter of 8.65 inches, or 6.56 inches, excuse me. And that's, again, the pentagon-hexagon merger. And if I take a pendulum and swing it here on 30 degrees of arc, it will take exactly 1 second of Earth time to swing each direction. So time, now the foot, cubit, and meter are all in the same geometry, and so is time. And this distance right here of 1/12 of this circle is exactly 1.718 feet. So then we're able to take that to geometry and figure out that time, and another way of looking at time is that it's me backwards. ITME. Time. And it's an equation that's just gravity divided by the square root of pi minus 1. And that gives us the number of seconds in one day. all of this came out of the work that Da Vinci left in an encryption. Then there's many equations on here as well that I won't bother taking you through. But the larger message, even when we go to the fifth dimension, taking the value of the hypersphere at the fifth dimensional value gives us a value of 7,920, which is exactly the diameter of Earth in miles. So it's bringing us back to cycles of time, these cycles right here, and telling us to merge back into this oneness of the superconscious mind.
Which is beyond time, actually, which is
beyond time.
Which is the area where time has no influence. That's why, for example, the more we merge into our center, into our consciousness, we're able to, as it has been noticed with many, you know, that are preserving their youth or reversing their age. You know, how does this happen? You know, when you start meditating, you start looking younger. Why? Well, it's because you merge back into your center more often, transcending time or getting beyond the influence of it. And many of us have had that experience.
Right. So amid all that complexity, there's actually a very simple and beautiful message, which everything is one. And it's us that makes the illusion. The separation of our conscious and subconscious mind is like the separation of the masculine and feminine. The experience that we have around us is what we continue to judge until we no longer judge it. And then once we no longer judge it as gendered or biased or perspective, and realize that I can look at, you know, I have a cylinder here, right? Turn this, stop the share. Oh, where did it go? It's funny, I've got such a dark screen here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I've got this cylinder here, which is like a whiskey case, right? Someone gave me as a gift. Now, if I look at this, and let's say that I'm sitting over here, and there's a light shining, right? And I can't see what this is. All I can see is the front part of this, and I see the shadow on this wall. It's going to be exactly a circle. So I could look at that and say, that's a circle, definitively. And then someone could have the same thing, but he's sitting over here and he sees, you know, this structure, and he doesn't see that it's round. He thinks it's flat. And so he says, that's a rectangle.
Yeah.
Right? And yet, both are true because it's a cylinder. It all depends, your perception is dependent 100% on your angle of perspective. And what we finally have to realize is that our world is not a world of angels. It is a world of angles. A world where men speak of moral principles yet act on power principles. A world where we are always moral and our enemies are always immoral. Whatever it is. So we have to call ourselves out on our own bullshit, right? Which is that we have perceived the world around us to be a certain way because ultimately we believe that it benefits us. And we are the only ones that cannot see that that's our motivation. We are the only ones blind to our true motivations, which are good and evil and all one. They're both at the same time. Everyone is balanced. The only people that I have a hard time now dealing with in business and work is people that claim to be perfect on one side. Because that's narcissism. Narcissism is falling in love not with the self, it's falling in love with the reflection. It's only part of you, right? When you're actually blind to all the rest of you. And that's when bad things can happen. That's when weird stuff happens, right? That's when bad experiences can come out. And it's like, oh, you wake up in a pool of blood. It's like a werewolf. I killed again, right? Something bad happened. And when people don't recognize that about themselves, then they repress it all around them. So what happens is they live that life over and over and over again until they have a crash, right? So we tell ourselves the same illusion, the same lie. We say, oh, I'm in love with this person that I'm showing the outside world. I am only this reflection. I'm nothing else. There's nothing bad about me. right? Those people that think that, and so that's one of the things that I think, when someone says that they're big time into, kind of like a new age way of perceiving the world, the way that you can actually tell if that's really embedded in them or if it's just a trend or a fad is whether or not they are still talking about things that are evil and things that are good. If they're spending a lot of their time talking about conspiracy theories and stuff like this, they're still stuck in the illusion, right? They're still stuck in that same place. Instead, if you focus on just accepting and loving everyone for what they are, for who they are, without feeling the need to change them in any way, shape, or form, and fully accept them. I gave a TED talk on replacing fear with gratitude in your life. And it was great. People really responded well to it. But if I were to give another TED talk, and there's probably another one inside me somewhere, the next TED talk will not be on Da Vinci. It will not be on any of these things. It would, in part, it would integrate those elements, but it would not be the subject of it. The simpler subject would just be to replace judgment in my life with acceptance. Learning to accept. No longer asking the questions why. Why did somebody do that? There's no use. Everything has some form of its polarity until we no longer perceive that polarity. And that's a different way of looking at the world, but I think it's the one that is what Da Vinci and many, many others have tried to bring to us: non-judgment. Non-judgment is the most powerful thing we can do. It's actually the foundational basis of most religions that unfortunately then have been enshrouded with judgment.
Eventually, and they became the biggest judges on the planet, and the religious traditions are the ones that are judging, and the spiritual trends of all kinds are becoming the sharpest judges of us all. I'm going to take a second to do something and come back. And I was looking at what you said, and tell us, because you've said that until something changes, what was the most powerful moment that changed your life?
I experienced betrayal in a very, very difficult way. And I had always prided myself on being extremely loyal. And when I experienced betrayal, because, I've always been lucky, I guess, in business. And I've always somehow pulled out like some magic moment, even when it seemed like, I was going to fail. And then I probably got a little bit addicted to that even, because, when you know that you can pull a rabbit out of the hat, right? And you're kind of a magician, then you like to test yourself even further to see if you can go that far. Mm. So I had that experience happen a few years ago. And I thought that a lot of the people that were around me that were my quote unquote friends were in it with me through thick and thin, no matter what. And actually, when it looked like I might lose for the first time, then it would no longer benefit them to be my friend. So I learned betrayal in a very, very deep, deep way. And probably it happened with more than half the people that I knew, which was a big number. Now, many of those people are still in my life, because I forgave them. It didn't matter, because in the last second, I was able to pull out a rabbit, but it shocked everybody, including me. Right? I pulled a rabbit out in the very, very last second, like not even the last second, it was like the last millisecond. And I won the fight. But sometimes you have to ask yourself, what's the cost of winning?
And the purpose.
Right? And the purpose. And then I had to stop after I was no longer running and in this fight to retain what I built. then I had to stop and say, what happened? And instead of, for the first time, I felt very guilty and ashamed. So normally you could say, oh, they did this to me, they did that to me, they hurt me this, they hurt me that. But actually, that's not the way I reacted. And it was very difficult. It was a very difficult period for me. But then I realized that I must transmute that feeling. And so instead of being in sort of depression or something about it, even though I won, there's something called a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory means that you win, but you like won the battle, but you lose the overall plot, right? What's the war? And I remember feeling like that. But then something came over me, and I forgave both myself and everybody else. Now it's interesting because I went and kind of told the people that I forgave, but they were very deep in their own shame because they knew what they'd done also. And so it was very difficult for them to come back. I'm friends with many of them again, but it was hard for them to overcome that, even though I always forgave them. But for me to experience that great difficulty in my life where everything could almost come crashing down, in effect, it did emotionally. I went through this major shift of learning to look within. Why was I reflecting that circumstance? Why did I create this? And it was because I needed to learn unconditional love of myself. And when I came to that realization, it changed everything in me. So that was the major shift. And then I went on to an alchemical path, and I started sculpting. And I noticed that my sculptures, you don't think about what you're doing. You think, oh, I'm going to make a horse, or I'm going to make a man, or I'm going to make a torso or something. And my sculptures were imbued with some deep soul-based message that I didn't even learn until far after doing it. So it was a type of metallurgy and alchemy for me to learn how to transmute lead, the lead of mankind, into gold. There's a poem that I think we'll have to end on this, but there's a poem that I love by William Ernest Henley. It was written in 1875. And it goes, out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet, the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. When we realize that we are the producer, the actor, the director in our own play, and it's a play of love, to learn and experience, it can be the most powerful, profound, life-changing moment in our entire lives. And so I'm grateful for all of that. I don't think that the world is a difficult or challenging place because people don't like each other. I believe that the world can sometimes be a difficult and challenging place because people don't like themselves.
That's the first thing. That's the first thing. When you like yourself, you start liking everybody else, actually.
When you like yourself and you accept yourself. So accepting everybody else is tantamount to accepting yourself. So I've never thought of it as judge not lest ye be judged by someone else. I've always thought of it as judge not lest ye judge yourself.
Yes.
So that's my message for you today.
Thank you so much.
And such a pleasure to see you always. And I look forward to when we'll bump into each other again on the Giza Plateau or
Absolutely.
somewhere else in the world.
Gonna happen soon, probably in the redwoods if you're still doing that. I'm planning to bump into many people over there, and they're actually calling us. It's I don't know when it's gonna happen, but I'm the first time we went into the redwoods, I had the vision of us being into the redwoods while I was dancing in darkroom. You know, I do these trainings of 10 days in darkroom where I
Uh-huh.
stay there without food and light, visible light. And at some point we were doing this dance, and I was seeing many places on the planet where I would be, including the pyramids and so on. And I saw the redwoods, and that was in March. And then I was invited to speak at the redwoods gathering in July. And it was just it suddenly made sense of why I was seeing those trees. I'm seeing them again. So it's and the ones who are watching are knowing who I am, so I'm able to say that I don't care. I'm seeing them again. It's gonna happen soon then, and looking forward to meet you too. I was going to ask you about your vegetarian and how you feel.
Oh, yes, yes. Happy to answer that question real quick. I got back from Egypt, and I've always been someone who ate meat. I grew up with that. That was very normal, and there was like family things related to meat, which is kind of funny. And nobody convinced me, and nobody talked to me about it. But when I came back from Egypt on this last trip, the day I returned, I don't know what it was, but I couldn't eat meat anymore. I just couldn't do it. Like it just didn't, I don't know, it sounded really horrible to me. Not because it was ethical, but it didn't, it was like, when you're hungry, but you don't know what you want to eat, but you know what you don't want to eat. It was exactly like that, right? I felt like I didn't want to eat it anymore. And so I stopped eating meat about almost 3 months ago now, 2.5 months ago. And it's totally been amazing. First of all, it changed my appetite completely. Like I'm not hungry much anymore. So not only do I not eat meat anymore, I don't eat much anymore, which is kind of weird. But I only eat like once a day now, but I feel totally fine. It's been, I lost like 25 pounds, which, I guess is something like around, 12 kilos or something like that. And I feel great.
And you look like in your 20s, which was different the year before when we met. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I mean, I also the other thing that's changed is, because of the quarantine and everything, I only drink water for the most part now, or sometimes tea. And I used to go and have a drink at a bar or something with my friends every once in a while, or business colleagues, whatever. And that, of course, hasn't happened. So I haven't drank any kind of alcohol. And I had one glass of alcohol, and I had not drank anything for like, almost 2 months. I had one glass of alcohol to celebrate something, and literally I was hugging the toilet bowl. Like I felt horrible. Like I was so sick. I'm like, I think I'm going to die. This is unbelievable.
I know these things happen. Yes, there's an explanation sometimes for these things. When our frequency suddenly rises to a new level, whatever that is, you perceive the things you were doing before as undoable. You're no longer frequency matching certain things, like meat in your case, but it goes in all ranges with how we use our bodies, also how we treat our bodies, how we use our bodies with others, what we put on our bodies as cosmetics. Everything like that changes because our frequency is shifted to a level where it doesn't tolerate anymore. It doesn't tolerate the stuff that would naturally harm us, to a point where at some point it does just tolerate the high frequency stuff, like fruits, vegetables, at some point juices, at some point diluted juices, at some point just tea, and at some point you drop that even. And that's the natural path to pranic nourishment. I say people, you just don't force yourself or fast to death or something. It just naturally raises your frequency in your cells, and your body is not going to tolerate the things that are not frequency matching it.
Yeah, no, it's true. And the other thing, I haven't gone to the no eating at all stage, but although it's like every day is a fast because I don't eat until 5 o'clock
Mm-hmm.
at all, usually. And my wife planted a garden. So we have like a big garden now. And it's like already grown up. And I mean, in no time, it's amazing. It took 2 months and we have every kind of vegetable you can have and every kind of fruit, even grapes and everything. We already had grapevines because at our house, the former owners of the house had like a little vineyard in our backyard. So we already had lots of grapes, but we didn't have anything else. And now we have everything, oranges, apples, you name it. And how fast it all comes to life is kind of incredible. So, if you don't have a home garden, I really recommend it. And the other thing that's changed as well is I don't eat out anymore. So I just make all my own food. There's something it's been a little bit challenging for my wife because, she's used to kind of doing it for us as a family type of thing. And now lately I've just been kind of like mainly making my own because I think there's something where, at a subconscious level, what your body needs.
Yeah, all the time.
And there's a frequency associated with that.
Yeah.
And so what you are thinking and feeling, what you're feeling mainly, is going to yield the best nourishment for what you need. For example, I'll give you an example. I had one experience about a month and a half after not eating meat anymore. I woke up in the middle of the night. I had a horrible cramp in my leg. And I immediately knew what it was. And I just knew that it was because my protein level had dropped too much, right? So I went downstairs to the pantry and I was craving pistachio nuts. So I ate a whole bunch of pistachios and the cramp went away, right? And I didn't even realize that pistachios were very packed full of protein. I knew nuts were kind of heavy in protein, but pistachios are what my craving was. Right. And then I read about it and it was like, oh yeah, that's perfect. That actually what I was feeling to do was the right remedy.
Yes.
To fix it. And I haven't had I think it was just too rapid of a change for my body, where it's like a major shift in protein. But the benefit has been also my kidneys are operating much better.
Absolutely.
Because kidneys don't like protein. And I've always had a problem with my kidneys and protein and hypertension. So when I told my doctor, he said, so how are you? Because he called me and said, is everything okay with COVID? And I said, I'm fine. And I said, oh, by the way, I became vegetarian and I lost like 20 pounds at that time. And he's like, oh, I can't wait to do all of your vital statistics because I'm just so curious to see how much it all improves.
It might motivate him as well. It's interesting. And if you think about it, I'm going to just invite another thought is if you think about it, you had a cramp from lack of protein, right? And for a body to supplement back, to level back into the normal level of protein, it would take some days or it would take some supplements. And it would take a certain quantity and this and that. But in fact, what you did is you put in that energy of protein in your body. It literally translated into where it needed it and your cramp went away. So that's how it works, Now I can, for example, many people I've seen that they can take a sip of what the deficit would be, either calcium or whatever. You take 2 tablespoons and that energy just goes and fixes everything. You don't even need to take the amount that would match in calories or in grams or in whatever they're measuring in to balance your diet. You just do the energy and it goes back right where you need it. So that's the magic of it. And our bodies are fantastic. Can't wait to see what you discover next.
For those of you that are interested in following it, it's I started doing Instagram about a year and a half ago, and Facebook, and now it's almost 200,000 people that are following this type of work on my different social media platforms. And I never thought that people would be, interested like that. And I don't do it. It's funny. Sometimes, yesterday I posted the thing on time going backwards, and someone said, I don't believe NASA. I don't believe in NASA, like it's a religion or something, right? And I wrote back, and I wasn't trying to be rude. I just said, thank you, but I don't care what you believe. Right?
Yeah.
And so I was shocked. I wasn't trying to be rude to the person, right? It's like, thank you, that's fine. I don't feel the need. What I believe doesn't require that you believe me.
Doesn't
right?
require validation. Doesn't.
Right, it requires no validation, and it's pretty empowering. And it's funny because I went back and looked at the post later in the day, and the post already got like 12,000 likes or something, and then I went back and they had clicked like. That one comment I said, I don't care what you believe, got like almost 300 likes, right? Just on this one comment, because I think there's something very profound in that too.
Yeah.
Which is we seek so much validation from the illusion that we've created around ourselves. And once you break out of it, you don't really feel the need that everybody agrees with you. You don't feel the need that people will either resonate to the frequency or they will not. That's okay. I don't judge them for it. That's their choice. Like people that believe the earth is flat, okay? Because people ask me this all the time. The earth is flat. I'm like, I know. And it's so funny because sometimes they'll write on there, no matter what, they'll say, I'll put some geometry that has nothing to do with the earth. And then they'll say, see, the earth is flat. And I'm like, how do you come to this conclusion? But I don't care that you come to this conclusion, right? But I'm like, that's an interesting mental, like, how does it connect? I don't understand how it connects. But people ask me all the time about it. And I say, look, if we lived in a two-dimensional world, how would you describe the third dimension to the two-dimensional people around you? You could only use the vocabulary of the two dimensions. You'd have no word for depth, right? What is depth? And in a way, you could say the same thing. Maybe there's another word for the fifth dimension, which is spiritual depth. But how do you describe such a word without having the word already exist and already be codified as knowledge, right? You can't. And so for everyone that's moving into the fifth dimensional experience, I kind of joke in my own mind and I say, well, look, everything has to be equal opposite. That means when you double something, and 1/5 must be 0.2, and 1/2 is 0.5. So there's 2 and 5 are like mirrors of each other. I'm like, well, maybe because it's a mirror, everyone that believes that there's a fifth dimensional earth, for everyone that does that, there must be an equal person that believes that there's only a second dimensional earth.
So that it's all balanced eventually. I'm going to use that in my future talks, if you allow, because I really, really enjoyed it. It's a great way to end this conversation.
Yes.
So in case people are asking if the earth is evolving or not, we might say that it is evolving or not. And everything is fine.
If that's right. If you perceive the evolution, it's evolving for you.
Yes.
That's the double slit phenomenon in quantum physics. If you don't perceive the evolution, then it's not evolving for you.
Exactly. And
that's okay. And there must be an equal number. It's not going to be everybody. It's just the nature of it. And then I accept it. I don't feel the need to try to convert you or teach you, or there's no point. I just my test here is just, can I love you anyway?
Oh, thank you so much. Right back at you from all of us. Actually, in the comments on YouTube, you have very, very good feedback here. Such a gorgeous, illuminating conversation. Many thanks to both of us. And somebody else is saying that they're going to join us in Redwoods. And it was wonderfully. Go ahead.
I hope you all do, and I hope to see you. And I'm looking forward to. It's time for us to have our dragonfly moment, I think.
Yeah. And
to come out, and it's going to slowly happen, but we'll take each day at a time, each step at a time, and just remember that it's all how we perceive the world around us. We can live. Some people I know, they believe that there are no such thing as miracles in life, right? And other people believe that everything in life is a miracle. I'd rather be that person.
Well, we are
But I
brave.
accept the other. I accept the other. But I'd rather be the person that believes everything in life is a miracle, because I see everything in life as a miracle. And even being able to be here and talking with you across thousands of miles on my computer screen. I was looking back today, and every time I have a birthday, I kind of reflect a lot. And I've had such an amazing life.
We trust that. The screen just froze. I don't know if you still hear me, but I don't hear you anymore.
And I've got a frozen screen of you. There you go. I wish everybody a great day. I look forward to seeing you again very soon, and wish you all the best and much love to everyone.
Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your wisdom and for your openness.
Thank you. Thanks, my dear. All right. Talk to you later.
Much love, everyone, and see you soon in the next episode. And of course, looking forward to meeting you again on 1st of June to the Pranic process online for 8 days of transforming ourselves in dragonflies. See you soon, everyone. Keep an eye on your emails for the next conversations. Bye-bye.